ready, I'll give you a jump start on the trivia question for today. The trivia question today is, which Iowan was the first woman to be licensed to practice law in the United States? Which Iowan was the first woman licensed to practice law in the United States? So we will give the answer after we do our announcements. So Christina, give us a heads up when you want us to begin. We're getting close to our start time.
Yeah. I am all set. I am dropping that trivia question in the chat for everyone so you can read it if you want to. Let us know your answers. Erin, yes, I think we can get started.
Okay. Well, we are so grateful today to be joined at the Iowa Farmers Union Lunch and Learn with our guest, Nina Elkadi, and we'll be talking about. So it's great to have you here, Nina.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's always a pleasure to be in person. So this is really exciting. I know you're all online, but we're in person. So
yes, we normally don't get our guests in person. So it's really a pleasure. We are both at the Drake University conference today, the Harkin Institute and the John Hopkins Center for a Livable Future are co-hosting a conference called Industrial Farm Animal Production, the Environment, and Public Health. And there's a lot of great Farmers Union folks here, and Nina is here covering the event. But our topic today will be on Farm Bill issues. So we're really looking forward to a wonderful conversation. Let's do a couple of Farmers Union announcements before we begin, if that's all right. First, I wanted to mention that if it's not on your calendar already, please do put on your calendar. December 6th and 7th, we will have the Iowa Farmers Union Annual Convention. It's taking place in Ames, Iowa on December 6th and 7th. We have a wonderful set of speakers lined up. We will discuss our policy, which will serve as our guide and our policy Bible for the coming year. And then we'll also elect new Farmers Union like we do on tap December information about that. Also, we wanted to mention that the National Farmers Union Women's Conference is taking place in San Antonio, November 7th through 9th. And that's going to be a fantastic event. We love to send Iowans to the National Farmers Union Women's Conference this year in San Antonio. So check out that information in the link in the chat. Next week on Iowa Farmers Union Lunch and Learn, we are going to be joined by two farmers who were in Washington, D.C. for the National Farmers Union fly-in, and we'll talk about their experience as we discuss Farm Bill issues. And we will learn about their opportunity to learn about the issues and then about their conversations with policy leaders. They did a fantastic job advocating for our organization there. So we'll look forward to that. And that fits right in for our topic today. We are so grateful that we are joined by Nina Elkadi. She's an Iowan who reports on the intersection of agriculture, water, and the environment, and we'll be talking about the current Farm Bill situation. And we'll dive into what that information means for discussions today and in the coming weeks and in the coming months as we approach the deadline for a new Farm Bill. So, thank you so much. Your work always talks about the intersection of science and how corporate negligence affects consumers and workers. And that fits right into our Farm Bill discussion today. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm going to turn this just a little bit because I have some slides for you all. So Erin, you'll be here in the periphery.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, so it's really exciting to be here to talk about the Farm Bill, which I'm sure many of you are pretty concerned about and have a lot of questions about. Academically, I'm kind of a historian by training, so you will have to learn if you don't already know about some of the history. So I'm just going to share this with you here. And yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about like the current state of things at the end, and then I'll start with where we're starting. So I think this is probably common knowledge to many of you as farmers, But a lot of people who are eaters and aren't maybe connected to the agricultural system might not consider what they're doing agricultural, but really every eating, anything part of the food system is part of agriculture. So I just kind of wanted to frame the Farm Bill conversation, which is so deeply entrenched in policy, with this quote by Wendell Berry. And for those of you who are already subscribed to my newsletter, some of this is going to be a repeat of information, but hopefully that'll just drill it further into your brain. So I know there's a lot of text on here, but I think it's important to really start the conversation by saying the Farm Bill has always been controversial. It's not like this year is the first year there is Farm Bill controversy. And the Farm Bill is also, relatively new. It's kind of not even 100 years old, or almost a little over 100 years old. And the first one that was proposed was vetoed. And it didn't actually get passed as like an actual farm bill until 1933. So it was kind of this New Deal era legislation. It was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and it tied together agriculture and food programs. Interestingly, and I think this is kind of, it was fun for me to learn about, this first version of the Farm Bill did include conservation. So it provided subsidies for farmers to not plant on some of their land. Obviously, there were a lot of, wartime concerns about food and prices. And so that was kind of an attempt to help farmers make ends meet. That first Farm Bill is also when school lunch programs started, which as farmers, you probably know, are a pretty crucial tie-in to how, how farmers where they send their food and where the government is intervening or not. And then this comic on the right, I just thought was kind of funny. It's from the Library of Congress, and it's all of these different stakeholders, farmers unions on there. And, Coolidge is like, well, if you guys keep trying, maybe you'll get something from me. And they didn't. But now we do have a Farm Bill. So moving ahead in history, that act that I just mentioned that FDR passed was actually declared unconstitutional because it used federal dollars to inflate crop prices. As I mentioned, farmers were incentivized to plant less. So they went through all this rewriting, restructuring, and in 1938, a new Farm Bill was passed. And this was talked about at the conference that we're at, actually, but that was really focused on soil conservation. That is kind of one of the original tenets of the early Farm Bill legislation. It was focused on conservation. 1938 is also when federal crop insurance began. So one thing I think you probably all know, but a lot of people don't realize, is that the Farm Bill has kind of these two separate things happening, right? One of those things, a big chunk, 76% of funding is going toward nutrition programs like SNAP. And then the other approximately 24% is usually going to farmers, right? So that includes crop insurance, it includes conservation. But I think this is important to talk about because, as I'll say later, this is kind of where some of the hiccups are happening this year. But you have two entities which maybe were very connected in the 1930s, like food programs, school lunches, et cetera. And then you have what's happening on the field or what's happening with farmers day to day. And I think I wrote this down because at the conference we're at right now, Austin Frerick, who is the author of Barrens, many of you are probably familiar with this work, he proposed that maybe we should be separating the conservation programs from the rest of this. So conservation specifically might end up, in his ideal proposed scenario as a completely different chunk from this nutrition. And I know that I'm sure Aaron will talk about some of the priorities of funding in the Farm Bill that the union has. And I think that's a really key thing here, is that it's all lumped together, but as you can see, the pieces of the pie are not that equal. So I included some photos from the Farmers Union trip a few weeks ago, which I was covering for Barn Raiser, which is a publication focused on rural issues. And I think a common question is, what's the holdup? Why is it not passing yet again? Why are we maybe coming on to another delay? And I think, it's hard to say what is the top thing that is making it not pass, but I wanted to outline a couple things where there is some disagreement between the House proposed bill and then, the Democrats in the Senate who might have some different ideas of priorities. So as I mentioned, SNAP is really at the core of a lot of this. The current House Farm Bill draft proposes cuts to SNAP benefits. For a lot of Democrats in the Senate, this is a pretty hard line issue that you won't see a lot of budging on. So, there are a lot of Democrats who say, there's no way I'm going to vote for a farm bill that cuts SNAP. And I think that is really where we're seeing a lot of the tension and where we will continue to see a lot of the tension. Also, obviously support for farmers is a point of contention. I think that the current House bill does provide a lot of subsidies and help for farmers, maybe at a larger corporate scale. And I'll talk about this a little later too. But, there are a lot of advocates, especially Democrats, who say that there need to be some more supports for specialty crop insurance and supports for smaller farmers, especially to diversify their agricultural production. So as I was mentioning, some of these subsidies might support these larger operations who are planting, just corn or just soybeans, or maybe both. But maybe some groups are calling for some more wiggle room there. And then, the other kind of main points I want to make are environmental and conservation funding. You might recognize some farmers union folks up here, which maybe I'll ask Erin the questions, but I think that IRA funding is a big concern for a lot of people. And a point that's kind of confusing here is that the House is wanting to reallocate Inflation Reduction Act funds into the Farm Bill. And at first, when you first hear that, you're like, oh, great, more funds in the Farm Bill. But really, that might potentially be moving money away from more climate, quote unquote, climate smart practices or climate adaptation measures. And then on to the next point, a big thing related to animal agriculture is the current Farm Bill draft has something called the EATS Act, like eating, EATS Act. And a lot of advocates are concerned that if the Farm Bill passes with the EATS Act, it would overturn laws like Proposition 12 and Measure J in Question 3 in Massachusetts, which have regulations on what kind of meat is able to be sold in those states. So Proposition 12 says, you can't have meat sold in California that is raised in gestation crates. And the current Farm Bill language from the House would potentially overturn California's ability to do that. Finally, the last point here that I want to make is just on labor protections. The current version kind of decreases some protections for farm workers, specifically regarding pesticide regulations and other exposure and occupational health concerns. So again, the Democrats in the Senate are wanting a farm bill with more language that includes stronger worker safety provisions. That's kind of a really high level look at some of the disagreements or things that are happening with the current farm bill. So I just want to end with the question that I know someone was going to ask me, so I tried to anticipate it so that I wouldn't be put on the spot. Will it pass this year? And, I don't have a crystal ball. And I think that it's the question everyone's asking, will the Farm Bill draft pass by the September 30th deadline? I don't want to go on the record saying no, because then if I'm proven wrong, it's not a great start to my journalism career. But I don't think so. I don't think that there's enough time for all of these things that I'm mentioning to get sorted out. And, Austin also had this great line this morning that the Farm Bill has always been like Goldilocks finding that sweet spot, right? Like the spot in between where we can all agree. And I think to get to that spot right now, it's going to be tricky. And I think I'm curious to hear what Erin thinks about the farmers union spoke with a lot of legislators last week, and, they might have a better sense of what's going on there. So I think that's all I have for you. If you like learning about this stuff, I have a newsletter that I think was dropped in the chat. And actually, I know we're talking about Austin Frerick all the time.
Sure.
But my next newsletter, I have a Q&A with him about grocery store price gouging and kind of the history of that and how it all connects really back to the Corn Belt. So yeah, thank you.
Well, and just as a reminder for folks, as you put on your calendar, the Iowa Farmers Union Convention taking place in Ames, December 6th and 7th, we are lucky that we will be joined by Austin Frerick as our keynote address then too. So we're really grateful that that's working out for us. And so keep that on your calendar. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. And Nina, thank you for putting in your contact information to read more of your work and to reach out to you. So one of the other common questions asked is, you highlighted some of the differences between the House version and the Senate version and Republican priorities versus Senate priorities. Oftentimes, well, almost every farm bill that has been successful has been a bipartisan farm bill. But what we also know is that oftentimes the regional differences are just as important as the party differences in the farm bill. What are we hearing about that as far as what Midwest interests are versus the Southern interests in the farm bill? Did you get any feedback from folks? Some of our farmers union people were hearing a few things, and I'm curious if you have impressions about what, if there might be differences from one part of the country versus another.
Sure. Well, I'll be curious to hear what your folks heard. I think one of the biggest things with the Farm Bill that I've been hearing is that the current House draft, also the Senate doesn't really have a public draft yet. It's also worth mentioning, like we have ideas of what their priorities are, but is that, a lot of the Farm Bill does focus on these large scale Midwestern corporate farms, really. And I think that what I was mentioning with kind of this California's Prop 12, Massachusetts, question 3, it's really difficult to balance all of the interests that people have across the country when, as you all know, I mean, even in Iowa, things vary so much. I'm from Iowa City. That's a lot different than, Brooklyn, Iowa. There are a lot of different interests. And so I'm working around your question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So our folks also heard about those things that you mentioned. In addition, we know that the large farms in the South, the cotton and rice farms, take a huge amount of the budget when there is a price adjustment needed in those commodities, because those farms tend to be very, very, very large compared to Midwest farms as well. So so it's all part of the challenge of passing a farm bill. Why traditionally do you think it's been the case that nutrition and conservation and competition and price supports for commodities have all been part of this big piece that we call the Farm Bill?
Well, it's a great question because the House draft is around 900 pages. I haven't read all of it. I could never. And, I even am anticipating some of your questions. And I think it's so much in one bill that I'm a journalist, so I'm covering these issues and try not to insert my opinion too much. But I think that what Austin was saying today about separating some of these things, it makes sense at the point that we're at, that maybe perhaps all of these things shouldn't be in one bill, especially because, so for example, if one of the big current hurdles is around SNAP and nutrition programs, that is currently putting a standstill on conservation money. It's putting a standstill on updates to crop insurance, even though these are really, different things happening. So I think it is worth thinking about why it is the way that it is now. But I think going back, all these things were very connected, and they still are. But
right. Well, we're getting some comments about the timing of when we might see action on the Farm Bill. And it certainly does seem that after the election, there's going to be some fingers that are put up into the wind and see where the political power is going to lie after the election before deciding whether to act on the Farm Bill. So the political differences and the power differences after the election will just certainly determine whether they act. It sounds like there's a window. If the political winds are blowing in the right direction, if the power winds in the blowing right direction, there's still some time though, right, between the election and the new Congress.
Yes, definitely. And I think a lot of people are looking at that like few month window
Right.
as a potential time to really get things done. The Farmers Union was on the Hill 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there really isn't a lot of time that lawmakers were on the Hill and so in the rest of the year, right? September was really their big work time.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to asking these questions about when is it going to happen, if people in Congress are back in their home communities, they're not even on Capitol Hill, it makes it a lot more difficult for things to get done, obviously. So I think there are a lot of questions around what is going to be this scenario where all of these questions get answered, and maybe it is in that 2-month, 3-month window.
A lot of downtime for our farmers in the halls of Washington, there was always speculation. What if there is a Harris administration? What if there's a Trump administration? If the House goes this way, if the Senate goes this way, what if particular senators are there, but other people are not? And so there's just so many ways that this could fall. It's a little tough to tell, but there is some time. And it also seems like there is some conservation dollars, some Inflation Reduction Act dollars that are at stake. If it happens now, they get added on to the Farm Bill accounting as opposed whether they wait till the end of the year, then some of that money is lost. So it seems like there's some financial advantage to getting it done now. A lot of speculation about whether that's really going to be enough to carry the day. So you met a lot of farmers during our fly-in activities. What were your impressions of those conversations? Did anything surprise you as you were talking to farmers about their involvement in advocating for a farm bill in person?
Yeah, I think what's really important, and again, it's funny being on this because I'm sure a lot of you know this, but a question for people who are not close to agriculture or farming is, why does it matter that it happens now? Like, why are these updates needed now? And I think talking to a lot of farmers a few weeks ago, the current farm bill that we're working from was passed in 2018. Now, a lot has happened since 2018. I mean, we've lived through a whole pandemic. A lot has happened, and farming has changed quite a bit. And, it was brought up even at this conference that 2024 is going to be a lot harder on farmers when it comes to, how much money they're making than even 2023 was. And so I think that was really important, and something I tried to get across in my reporting is that this has implications for people who are farming now. And it has implications for people who are hoping that their farm is going to survive yet another really difficult year. And so I think that's where for me, it was important to hear that, like, these updates to crop insurance, to conservation funding.
Yes.
If you want to get more conservation acres on your farm, well, there need to be updates to how much you're getting paid for each acre, right?
Yeah.
And I think, those are just some points I left with.
Yeah. And certainly our members carried that message that it's important to do it now. Plus, in addition to some of those dollars needed to be updated now, and some of those programs needing to be updated now, it's a little bit of a scary proposition knowing what the political future is going to carry in front of us. Project 2025 is strike huge portions of farm programs and nutrition programs and conservation programs. There's a lot at stake, and what happens between now and January is is there's a lot of uncertainty.
Mhm.
So other reasons why our folks were carrying that message that pass the right farm bill as soon as possible.
Right. And I think that's important too. It's not just pass a farm bill, right? Like it is for a lot of people, depending on where they're falling on these conversations and what they believe to be important, it's, as we've been talking about, there are a bunch of different stakeholders, right? And people who believe in conservation, there are also people who don't. And so it's not just about passing something to have something on the books, especially when that thing could last 5 years like it has now, right? So I'm really thinking about what is going to be in law, right? Dictating these things.
Well, our time has passed really, really quickly, and there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more to be discussed on the Farm Bill, but remind people how to get in touch with you to follow up on your work.
Yeah.
What's the best way to reach out?
Well, I think, Christina, if you want to drop that link in the chat again, that's my newsletter, which is what I'm updating bi-weekly, really writing about agriculture, primarily in the Corn Belt region. And I'm also on Twitter and things like that. But that's where I'd love to see you all.
I love the name of the piece. That's a great piece. Give us a hint of what reporting you're doing now and what we can anticipate the subject of your upcoming work.
Sure. Yeah. Well, right now I have obviously a lot of pieces coming out of this Harkin conference. So questions about what are the ideal visions of the future of our food systems? How did we get to where we are today, especially with CAFOs and animal feeding operations in general? I also have some pieces coming out in Civil Eats about drought in the West. So a little different than what I usually do, but keep an eye out for those as well.
Very good. Well, thanks, everybody. This has been the Iowa Farmers Union Lunch and Learn, and we are so grateful that you're able to join us. This is part of our outreach effort to educate our members and educate the general public about family farming issues, about issues important to sustainable agriculture, and about thriving rural communities. So if you haven't had a chance to join the Farmers Union, please do so now. We are we know that we are most effective as an organization when we are working together. So if you haven't had a chance, join the Farmers Union now and reach out. We're looking forward to seeing everyone next week, where we'll talk to some of our members who were talking to members of Congress and on our fly-in. So please join us next week for our Lunch and Learn. And Christina, I've already forgotten. Did we give the answer to our trivia question?
I don't think we did. I was just thinking about that.
How often does that happen? I'm sorry, folks. So the first Iowan to be licensed to practice law, or I'm sorry, the Iowan who was the first woman to be licensed to practice law in the United States was a woman named Arabella Mansfield. She was from Southeast Iowa, near Pleasant. Well, I'm not sure exactly where she was from. She was from Southeast Iowa. In 1869, Iowa became the first state in the Union to admit women to the practice of law. She had to challenge this existing state law, excluding her and all women, and Iowa was the first state to license women to practice law. So Arabella Mansfield. So and there's a great story behind her efforts to challenge that law here in Iowa. So anyway, that's our trivia question for today. And again, thank you so much for joining us, Nina. It's great to have this conversation with you, and we're looking forward to reading more about your upcoming work.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Christina.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good day.